The morning started like any other Tuesday. I packed Emma's lunch with extra care turkey sandwich on whole wheat, carrot sticks with ranch dressing, apple slices, and her favorite chocolate chip cookies that we'd baked together the night before. At 7 years old, she was particular about her food, and I'd learned which combinations would actually get eaten versus which would come home untouched. I added a little note on a napkin, something I did every day. "You're my sunshine. Love." Mom? I dropped Emma off at Riverside Elementary at 8:15 a.m., watching her pink backpack bounce as she skipped toward the entrance. She turned and waved, her gap-toothed smile making my heart swell. I had no idea that in just a few hours, that carefully prepared lunch would become the center of a controversy that would shake our entire school community. The call came at 11:47 a.m. I was in the middle of a client presentation when my phone buzzed insistently. The school's number flashed on the screen. My stomach dropped. Calls from school in the middle of the day were never good news. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, my heart already racing. "Mrs. Peterson? This is Principal Hammond?" His voice carried an unusual tension that immediately put me on edge. "I need you to come to the school right away. There's been an incident involving Emma during lunch period. Is she hurt?" "What happened?" My voice came out higher than intended, panic threading through each word. "She's not physically injured, but she's very upset. I think it's better if we discuss this in person. How soon can you get here?" I was in my car within 2 minutes, the presentation completely forgotten. The 15-minute drive to the school felt eternal. My mind raced through possibilities. Had she'd been bullied? Had she gotten in a fight? Emma was generally a sweet, gentle child, not prone to drama or conflict. Whatever had happened must have been serious for the principal to call me in personally. When I arrived, the school secretary ushered me directly to Principal Hammond's office. Emma sat in a chair that seemed far too large for her small frame, her face blotchy from crying. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, stood nearby looking concerned. But it was the other woman in the room who immediately caught my attention. Patricia Whitmore, the president of our neighborhood HOA and a woman I'd had limited but never pleasant interactions with. Patricia stood ramrod straight, her perfectly pressed blazer and shellacked blonde hair giving her the appearance of someone perpetually ready for a fight. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was one of righteous indignation. I'd seen that look before at HOA meetings, when someone's trash cans were visible from the street, or when a lawn grew a quarter-inch too long. "Mommy." Emma launched herself at me, wrapping her arms around my waist and sobbing into my shirt. I held her tight, stroking her hair while looking at Principal Hammond over her head, silently demanding an explanation. "Mrs. Peterson, please have a seat," Principal Hammond began, his discomfort palpable. "There was an incident in the cafeteria. Today during lunch period, Mrs. Whitmore was here as a volunteer supervisor, and there seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding Emma's lunch." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, my protective instincts flaring. I looked down at my daughter, whose shoulders were still shaking. "Emma, sweetie, can you tell Mommy what happened?" Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Her voice came out small and wavering. "I was sitting with Mia and Jessica, and I was about to eat my sandwich when Mrs. Whitmore came over. She grabbed my lunchbox and threw everything in the trash," she said. Emma's voice broke, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "What did she'll say?" "Honey," I encouraged gently, though fury was already building in my chest. "She said our family doesn't follow rules, and that I shouldn't have that kind of lunch, that it was setting a bad example. And then she said that people like us are what's wrong with the neighborhood." Emma's words came out in a rush, and the cafeteria had gone quiet. Everyone was staring at me. "Mom?" Everyone. I felt my face flush hot as I turned to Patricia Whitmore. "You threw away my daughter's lunch," and said, "What exactly about our family?" My voice was steady, but barely. I was using every ounce of self-control not to explode. Patricia lifted her chin defensively. "I was enforcing the wellness policy. The school has clear guidelines about healthy lunches, and her meal was entirely inappropriate. As a community, volunteer and HOA president, I have a responsibility to uphold standards wherever I am. Children need to learn that rules apply to everyone. The wellness policy is a set of guidelines, Mrs. Whitmore, not strict requirements." Principal Hammond interjected, his own frustration evident. "And even if there were a concern, the appropriate action would have been to speak to me or the teacher, not to throw away a child's food." "I stand by my decision," Patricia said coolly. "Standards exist for a reason. To understand the full weight of what Patricia Whitmore had done, you need to understand our history. The tension between my family and Patricia hadn't begun at Riverside Elementary. It had been simmering for nearly 2 years. Ever since we'd moved into the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision. Meadowbrook Estates was one of those carefully manicured suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine and every house was painted in approved neutral tones. When my husband David and I bought our home there, we knew about the HOA, but we'd never lived in such a community before. We assumed it would be simple. Keep the yard neat, don't paint the house purple, be a good neighbor. We had no idea we were entering Patricia Whitmore's kingdom. Our first HOA violation. Notice arrived 3 weeks after we moved in. Our recycling bin had been visible from the street on a non-collection day. Apparently, we were supposed to keep it in the garage at all times, except for the 12 hours surrounding pickup. The fine was $50. Thought it was ridiculous, but paid it, chalking it up to learning the community rules. The second notice came because we'd planted flowers in our front yard without submitting a landscaping approval form. Never mind that they were tasteful petunias in colors that matched our house. They were unapproved petunias, and that meant another fine and a mandatory appearance before the HOA board, where Patricia had lectured us for 20 minutes about the importance of maintaining property values and community standards. The violations continued with absurd regularity. Our daughter's pink bike on the front porch. Violation. A welcome mat that was apparently 2 inches larger than regulation. Size. Violation. A garden gnome that Emma had painted in art class and proudly displayed by our mailbox. Major violational. Apparently, decorative statuary required written approval from the Architectural Review Committee, of which Patricia was, unsurprisingly, the chair. What made it worse was watching Patricia selectively enforce these rules. The Hendersons 3 doors down had a massive trampoline visible from the street, no violation. The Johnsons had painted their shutters a slightly different shade without approval, no violation. But anything my family did seemed to attract Patricia's immediate attention and disapproval. I'd tried to talk to her reasonably on several occasions. I'd approached her at community events, asked her if we'd offended her somehow. I tried to understand what we were doing wrong. Her response was always the same. She was simply maintaining standards and ensuring the right kind of people understood what was expected in Meadowbrook Estates. That phrase, the right kind of people, always made my skin crawl. David wanted to fight back, to challenge every violation, to make waves. But I'd counseled patience. We loved our house. Emma loved her school and had made friends in the neighborhood. Fighting Patricia Whitmore felt like fighting City Hall technically. Possible but exhausting and potentially futile. So we'd paid the fines, followed the increasingly Byzantine rules, and tried to stay under the radar. But what she'd done to Em, this was different. This wasn't about trash bins or garden gnomes. This was my child, humiliated in front of her peers. Her lunch literally thrown in the garbage while other kids watched. This was Patricia Whitmore taking her petty neighborhood power trip into my daughter's school and using it to hurt a 7-year-old child. As I sat in Principal Hammond's office, holding Emma close, I thought about all the times I'd backed down, all the times I'd swallowed my anger and paid the fine and moved on. Every one of those moments had led to this one. Patricia had learned that she could push us around without consequences, that we would always just take it. And now she'd crossed a line that I couldn't uncross, couldn't forgive, and absolutely couldn't let stand. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "you threw away my 7-year-old daughter's lunch. You humiliated her in front of her classmates, and you made comments about our family that were completely inappropriate. I want to hear you say exactly what you said to Emma. In front of Principal Hammond. Right now." Patricia's expression hardened. I already explained myself. I was enforcing wellness standards. If you're upset that your daughter doesn't meet basic nutritional guidelines, perhaps you should examine your own parenting choices, rather than attacking volunteers who are trying to help this school. The gaslighting was masterful, turning her cruelty into concern for children's health, making me the bad parent for being upset that she'd thrown away my daughter's food. But I had dealt with Patricia long enough to know her tactics. "The lunch you threw away," I said slowly, "contained a turkey sandwich, vegetables, fruit, and exactly 2 cookies. What about that? Violated wellness policies. Processed meat, full-fat dairy, in the ranch dressing, refined flour in the bread, and sugar in the cookies," Patricia rattled off as if reading from a checklist. "The wellness policy clearly states that lunches should be nutritionally balanced and free from excessive sugar and processed foods." Principal Hammond cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed our wellness policy thoroughly since this incident occurred. It's a set of recommendations and guidelines, not mandatory requirements. Parents are allowed to pack what they feel is appropriate for their children. Your interpretation of the policy is not only incorrect but also not within your authority to enforce. Furthermore," he continued, and I could hear the steel entering his voice, "several parents have now come forward to report that you made comments to their children about their lunches as well, though you didn't go so far as to throw their food away. This is creating a hostile environment for our students." This was news to me, and apparently to Patricia as well, whose face flushed slightly. "I have a responsibility," she began. "Your responsibility as a volunteer," Principal Hammond interrupted, "is to supervise student safety during lunch period. That's all. You are not here to enforce your personal beliefs about nutrition, discipline, or anything else." The room had settled into a tense silence when the office door opened. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, stepped back in, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 other students, Mia, Jessica, and a boy named Marcus, along with Marcus's mother, Dr. Chun, who I recognized from school events. Dr. Chun was a pediatrician and, more importantly, served on the school board. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Rodriguez said, but these children insisted they needed to talk to you, Principal Hammond. They said it was about what happened at lunch, and Dr. Chun felt it was important enough to pull them from class. Principal Hammond looked surprised but nodded. Of course. Please, come in. The three children filed in, looking nervous but determined. Mia, Emma's best friend, was clutching a small notebook. Jessica stood close to her, and Marcus positioned himself slightly in front of both girls, as if ready to protect them. Mr. Hammond, Mia said, her voice small but steady. We wrote down what Mrs. Whitmore said, all of it, because we knew Emma was crying and might not remember everything, and we thought it was important. She held out the notebook with both hands. Principal Hammond took it gently and began to read, his expression growing darker with each line. Dr. Chun moved to stand behind him, reading over his shoulder, and I watched her face transform from curious to horrified. Would you like to read this aloud, Principal Hammond? Dr. Chun asked quietly. I think everyone in this room should hear exactly what was said. He nodded grimly and cleared his throat, according to these three witnesses, who have each signed their names and written their accounts separately but consistently. Mrs. Whitmore approached Emma's table at approximately 12:15 p.m. She picked up Emma's lunchbox and examined its contents. She then stated, and I quote, "This lunch is completely unacceptable. Your mother clearly doesn't care enough to feed you properly. People who can't even follow simple HOA rules certainly can't be trusted to make good decisions about their children's nutrition." I felt my hands ball into fists. Emma pressed closer against me. Principal Hammond continued reading. She then threw the entire lunch into the nearby trash can. When Emma started to cry, Mrs. Whitmore allegedly said, "Don't cry. This is a lesson. Your family needs to learn that there are standards in this community. The Petersons are exactly the kind of people who drag down property values and set bad examples for everyone else's children. Your mother thinks rules don't apply to her. Now you're learning that actions have consequences." The room was completely silent except for Emma's quiet sniffling. Even Patricia Whitmore seemed to have frozen, though whether from shock at being confronted or from realizing the seriousness of what she'd done, I couldn't tell. According to these children, Principal Hammond went on, his voice tight with controlled anger. Several other students had witnessed this, and the entire cafeteria had gone quiet. Marcus here apparently said, "That's not fair, Mrs. Whitmore." Emma's lunch looked normal, and Mrs. Whitmore responded by telling him to mind his own business, unless he wanted to be sent to the principal's office. Dr. Chun spoke up, her professional demeanor barely containing her fury. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm trying to understand. You publicly humiliated a 7-year-old child, threw away her lunch leaving her with nothing to eat, and made personal attacks against her family, all while serving as a school volunteer in a position of authority over these children. And your justification is a wellness policy that you've completely misinterpreted." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "I don't have to stand here and be attacked. I am a respected member of this community. I volunteer my time to help this school. I serve on the HOA board. I have every right to maintain standards wherever I see them slipping. These children need discipline and structure, and parents like Mrs. Peterson need to understand that their choices affect everyone. This has nothing to do with wellness policies or school standards," I said, standing up with Emma still holding on to me. "This is about you carrying your personal vendetta against my family into my daughter's school. This is about you using your position as a volunteer to punish a child because you don't like how her parents manage their garden gnomes. How dare you?" Patricia started. "No," I cut her off, my voice rising. "How dare you? You have made my family's life miserable for 2 years with your petty violations and your thinly veiled implications that were somehow not good enough for Meadowbrook Estates. But this, targeting my daughter, making her feel ashamed and hungry and humiliated in front of her friends, this is beyond petty tyranny. This is cruelty to a child." Dr. Chun held up a hand. "Mrs. Peterson, I think you should know something else. After Mrs. Rodriguez called me about this incident, I made some calls to other parents. In the past 2 weeks alone, Mrs. Whitmore has made inappropriate comments to at least 6 other children about their lunches, their clothing, or their behavior. She told one child that his mother must not love him very much because she let him wear worn sneakers to school. She told another that her father's truck was an eyesore and that better families drove newer vehicles. Patricia's face had gone from flushed to pale. "I was trying to help these children understand the importance of you or bullying children," Dr. Kyun said flatly. "Using your position as an adult and a volunteer to make children feel inferior, that's not maintaining standards. That's abuse of power." Principal Hammond set down the notebook. "Mrs. Whitmore, effective immediately. Your volunteer at this school, I revoked. You are no longer welcome on campus except for scheduled parent-teacher conferences or official school events open to the general public. And even then, you will not be permitted any supervisory role over students." "You can't do that," Patricia sputtered. "I'll go to the superintendent. I'll go to the school board." "I am the school board," Dr. Chun said coldly. "Well, one member of it." and I can guarantee you that when this incident is brought before the full board at our meeting next week, we will be discussing not only your removal as a volunteer, but also implementing new screening and training procedures for all volunteers to ensure this never happens again. Section 4. The aftermath. What happened next unfolded over the following weeks, and the ripples extended far beyond that single afternoon in Principal Hammond's office. Patricia Whitmore did exactly what she threatened. She went to the superintendent. She made noise at school board meetings. She rallied her supporters in the HOA. But what she didn't anticipate was that her actions had finally pulled back the curtain on a pattern of behavior that many people had witnessed but few had been willing to confront. Within days of the incident, I received emails and messages from other parents at the school. Some shared their own experiences with Patricia, their cutting remarks to their children, their judgmental comments about their choices, the way she wielded her volunteer position like a weapon. Others were parents from Meadowbrook Estates who had their own HOA horror stories. One family had been fined repeatedly for having unapproved outdoor toys visible in their backyard, their own private backyard, because Patricia could see them from the street if she stood at just the right angle. The Facebook group Meadowbrook Estates community became a war zone. I didn't post anything myself. I didn't need to. Other residents began sharing their experiences, and a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Patricia hadn't just been strict about rules. She'd been selectively enforcing them, targeting families she deemed undesirable while giving passes to her friends and allies. The bias wasn't always obvious in individual cases, but when dozens of incidents were laid out together, it was undeniable. A petition began circulating to remove Patricia from the HOA board. Within a week, it had signatures from over 60% of the neighborhood residents. The HOA bylaws required a special election if more than 40% of residents requested. At Escol, the changes came swiftly. The school board meeting that Dr. Chun had mentioned turned into a standing room only event. I attended with David, sitting in the back while parent after parent stood up during public comment to share concerns about volunteer oversight. The board voted unanimously to implement new policies. Background checks for all volunteers, mandatory training on appropriate interaction with students, and a clear reporting system for any concerning behavior. Principal Hammond personally apologized to Emma and to our family. He also sent a letter to all parents explaining what had happened without naming Patricia specifically, but making it clear that a volunteer had overstepped boundaries and that new safeguards were being put in place. For Emma, the recovery was slower than I'd hoped, but faster than I'd feared. The first few days after the incident, she didn't want to go to school. She was afraid of seeing Patricia again, afraid that other kids would make fun of her. But her friends rallied around her in the way that young children sometimes can, with simple, fierce loyalty. Mia brought her an extra cupcake at lunch the next day. Jessica made her a friendship bracelet. Marcus appointed himself her lunch bodyguard, a role he took very seriously. He's sitting next to her every day for 2 weeks. The school counselor, Mrs. Park, worked with Emma twice a week for a month. They talked about what had happened, about standing up to adults who abused their authority, about the difference between following reasonable rules and accepting mistreatment. Mrs. Park gave me resources too. Articles about helping children process public humiliation and rebuild their confidence. One evening, about 3 weeks after the incident, Emma and I were making dinner together, her choice, homemade pizza. As she carefully arranged pepperoni on her half of the pie, she looked up at me. "Mom," she said quietly, "was it my fault? What Mrs. Whitmore did?" I put down the cheese grater and knelt beside her, turning her to face me. "Emma Peterson, listen to me. None of that was your fault. Not one single bit. Mrs. Whitmore is a grown woman who made a choice to be cruel to a child. That's on her, not you. Do you understand?" She nodded, but I could see she was still processing. Some of the kids at school said maybe my lunch really was bad, but maybe she was right about the cookies. "Your lunch was perfectly fine," I told her firmly. "And even if it wasn't, even if I had packed you nothing but candy, which I didn't think, right thing for Mrs. Whitmore to do would have been to talk to me or to Principal Hammond. Adults don't throw children's food in the trash and say mean things about their families. That's not about rules. That's about her being a bully." "Can adults be bullies?" Emma asked. And the question broke my heart a little because it showed how much this had changed her understanding of the world. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes adults are bullies. Sometimes people with power use it to hurt others, instead of to help them. But you know what? Other adults can also stand up and say that's not okay. Like Principal Hammond did, like Dr. Chu did, like your teacher did, and like Mommy is doing." The special HOA election was scheduled for 6 weeks after the incident. In the meantime, Patricia remained president, but her power had been significantly curtailed. 2 other board members had resigned in protest of her behavior, and the remaining members voted to suspend all new violations and fines until after the election and a full review of HOA policies. I decided to run for HOA president myself. David thought I was crazy. "Why would you want that headache?" he asked, but I felt like I needed to see this through. If Patricia's reign had taught me anything, it was that HOA boards mattered. They could make a neighborhood feel like a community, or like a prison. They could be run by petty tyrants or by people who actually cared about their neighbors. My platform was simple: reasonable rules, fairly enforced, no more selective violations, no more targeting families for personal reasons. An HOA that actually served the community instead of controlling it. The campaign was exhausting. Patricia's supporters painted me as a troublemaker who wanted to eliminate all standards and turn Meadowbrook Estates into a free-for-all. I focused on knocking on doors, listening to neighbors' concerns, and building a coalition of residents who were tired of living in fear of their HOA. Election night, I won with 6% of the vote. The following week, I attended my first HOA board meeting as president. Patricia was there, sitting in the audience with her arms crossed, radiating fury. But she didn't speak during public comment. For the first time in the 2 years I'd known her, Patricia Whitmore was silent. My first act as president was to propose a comprehensive review of all HOA rules and enforcement procedures. My second was to eliminate the backlog of unpaid violations, giving everyone a fresh start. My third was to establish clear, written guidelines for what violations would be enforced, and how, with a transparent appeals process. It wasn't perfect. Some longtime residents grumbled that standards were slipping. A few families moved out, claiming the neighborhood had lost its character. But more families told me they finally felt like they could breathe, like they could live in their homes, without walking on eggshells. As for Emma, she slowly returned to her normal, cheerful self. 6 months after the incident, she asked if she could bring cookies to school to share with her class for her birthday. I hesitated, my protective instincts flaring. But then I saw the hope in her eyes, and realized that if I said no because of what Patricia had done, Patricia would still be winning. Of course you can bring cookies, I told her. What kind do you want to make? Chocolate chip, she said immediately. The kind we made before, because those are the best. We baked them together the night before her birthday, and I packed them carefully in a container with a note for her teacher. Next day, Emma brought home an empty container and a huge smile. Everyone loved them, Mom, she reported. And Mrs. Rodriguez said they were delicious and that you must be a great baker. Well, I said, pulling her into a hug, I had an excellent helper. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd confronted Patricia earlier. If I'd fought those initial HOA battles instead of trying to keep the peace. Would it have prevented what happened to Emma? Or would Patricia have found another way to strike at us? I'll never know for sure. But what I do know is that standing up to bullies of adult ones, even ones with official titles and community positions, is worth it. Not just for yourself, but for every other person they might target next. Emma learned that lesson too, though she learned it the hard way. The last time I saw Patricia Whitmore was at the grocery store about a year after the incident. We reached for the same box of cereal, and our eyes met. For a moment, I wondered if she would say something, if she would apologize or defend herself, or make some cutting remark. Instead, she pulled her hand back, grabbed a different box, and walked away without a word. I took